Okay, we're back here in Truth Finder's Path once again with Bas Spliet, the student from Ghent, Belgium. And Bas was interrupted with us the first time when we had our conversation. We can go through just briefly what we were talking about and then take it from there. What do you think, Bas? Should we just find our way through this topic?
I think that's a very good idea, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, I as well. So Bas is a student of history. After that, he became a student of Arabic studies. He's also has a big passion and a hobby in journalism. Obviously, he's been to Syria. I think the most important story from my point of view, and the reason why I wanted to interview him for this Truth Finder's Path series, is that he represents something that we don't have in the mainstream media, and we need a lot more in the truth movement as well. And what does that mean? What I'm talking about, his eyes into reality are unique, like all of ours. And he went to Syria as a student. He happens to be from Belgium. He happens to be quite articulate and skilled in journalism and communicating. He's got a big heart for that. So I resonated with some stuff that I saw. I had him on here. We were interrupted a bit. We're just going to run through the same thing that we did before and get into some new stuff along the way. Does that sound good, Bas?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. Well, I'm not a student of journalism, so if you want to correct me and give me some tips, I'm open. I'm just doing what I do. I'm happy to learn.
Me too, man. Me too. I think where we left off is we first talked about my awakening, but that's maybe a bit more off topic.
9/11.
Sorry?
9/11.
9/11, indeed. Yes. Briefly, for so many people, I think I was browsing through YouTube one day. I bumped into a video of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And the snowball started rolling from there, and eventually I ended up here. But Syria was like the first thing I really got focused on, because there was just so many things coming together. Like your whole reality comes falling down, and the way for me to cope with it was to first focus on one thing and then go to another. And for me, that was Syria, and I got really into that, and maybe almost in an obsessive fashion, I started researching it, writing about it, and eventually, after many months of trying to get a visa, I got a press visa, even though I'm just a student, but that was nice. And I ended up in Syria for 10 days during the middle of April, which is of this year, which was a very interesting time, because unfortunately, because a lot of things were happening. Then it was like the last days of fighting in Eastern Ghouta. The bombs were still falling when I arrived on Eastern Ghouta, but also on the capital, on Damascus, because that's something that's often forgotten. The rebels in Eastern Ghouta shell and kill many people inside Damascus. I was there during the alleged chemical weapons attack, which we by now, of course, know almost for sure just was a complete hoax. I was there during the bombardment of Israel on the T2 facility. I was there during the Western bombardments, and that was my and then was my last day. I went to Damascus. I was in Tartus when the strikes happened. I was actually interviewed by national TV, Belgian national TV, by phone on the reception in Tartus, and they were like, "What's happening? How are people reacting? Are they like all freaking out, or they're staying in their bunkers or something like that?" And I was like, "No, people are just living on through this. They had to live through this for 7 days," and I used that opportunity to talk about important stuff, how this is manufactured war by our governments, and and he like kept deviating away from that and kept asking me like, well, but you know, how do people react? I only want to know that. And in the end, they took this segment of 10 seconds maximum where I said like, yeah, people are just living through it, and they cut the rest out. There was yeah, to be expected. But after that, I turned to Damascus. I talked to some people there following the strike, and people were just living on and were defying this aggression. And unfortunately, then I had to leave.
That was a very exciting short trip.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
What do you think? Let's go through just a couple of questions that could be of interest to someone else. Let's see. If I'm a student and if I go to Syria for 10 days and I see, so how many battlefields have you been to?
Of course, I wasn't near an actual battlefield, but I saw the aftermath of many of them. I saw. I went to Zamalka, a suburb in Eastern Ghouta that had been liberated by the Syrian government from Jais al-Islam or another Islamist rebel group 2 weeks prior to that. I went to Al-Hajjala refugee center for internally displaced Syrians. It's another term. Where people from Eastern Ghouta came in, and I talked to a lot of civilians who were in the midst of all that, and their testimonies were quite terrifying, to say the least. What they had to go through under the rule of the rebels was just insane.
The rule.
Then I also
the rule of the rebels. So this is actual terror groups like ISIS or something else.
Nah. They talked about the rebels inside Eastern Ghouta, in the suburbs of Eastern Ghouta, where they lived for 7 years, and the names given to the groups that control this area range from Jabhat al-Nusra, that's true, but no ISIS, to quote-unquote moderate rebel groups. But the testimonies these people gave me about moderate or extremist terror groups alike were just insane. One woman talked about how she was imprisoned for a year and a month into a makeshift prison that was made for women only, and where militants and doctors alike just raped women and killed women, killed children. It's just the most insane stories you can imagine. And actually, when you hear, if you go into the internet and you find other comparable testimonies of other journalists who went there, you find these accounts confirmed, as well as in other situations, such as in Eastern Aleppo a year and a half ago. And the people I talked to didn't specify which specific rebel group they were talking about, but they intermingle and they work with each other, and sometimes they interfight, but they share this broad same ideology. So it's not that there's this one peaceful moderate rebel group who is absolutely okay, because another journalist from the Irish Times, so a mainstream publication, actually went to visit the same camp, same refugee center 2 weeks before me, and here it's roughly the same stories about a boy of I know his age, perhaps 10, being raped by a militant, of people of medical and food aid being withheld from the people. Just absolutely terrifying stories. And the stories that he heard were specifically from militants from Faylaq ar-Rahman, which is by far the most moderate rebel group the mainstream media depicts of the rulers of Eastern Ghouta. So yeah, there you have it. It's the most moderates are just extreme as the usual extremists of Jabhat al-Nusra or Jais al-Islam.
And we hear this story over and over again from eyewitnesses and many people who are on. In fact, every single person who went to Syria on the ground, if they weren't representing the mainstream news, then they were telling the exact same story.
Yeah, indeed. And it's such a discrepancy. And if you think about Eastern Aleppo, it was like an even more highly coordinated media attempt to establish and create fake news, to learn to use that weird term. And you had this, if you remember, you had these last messages from civilians inside of Eastern Aleppo saying like, Assad is killing us all, or yeah, all this kind of things. But when people, like regular civilians, fled the area when the Syrian army was advancing into Eastern Aleppo, just as now as Eastern Ghouta, the testimonies you heard from journalists, but also priests or just regular travelers who went there and just filmed there with their own cameras and put it on YouTube was insane. People were just so happy to be free. And then you really started to doubt, like, who were these people who were being interviewed? They are into cahoots with these rebel groups. They're like the White Helmet, Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. They're all a propaganda construct to convince not Arabs, not Syrians, but people here in the West, to convince them that there needs to be an quote-unquote humanitarian intervention in the region, and to perpetuate the cycle of war. And that's why it's so important to understand that civilians, people here in the West, like you, like me, like you in New Zealand, like so many other people, probably most people watching this, we are not neutral observers. We have a duty to call our governments out and to debunk the propaganda, because if we just go along with the flow, we legitimize the war. That as we're the victims, we're also victims of propaganda. If we let this happen, the blood's on our hands. You know, we have to find a way to debunk the claims being made, to legitimize war, because war has been built on lies for every war. So this really needs to stop.
Let's make it really simple for people, Bas. I'm going to ask for your help here. So I'll start this thought, and great. I might not be able to finish it like you can. So just jump in anytime. But how I see it is, it starts off very simple. Big money wants war. The biggest money is war. A lot of free stuff can be stolen from war. Entire governments, all the resources of the country can be stolen, and the country can be set up with puppet leaders that then make war with neighbors that they hate. And all this is known, that big money wants this sort of thing, because big money can make a lot of more money by investing millions. They might make billions. By investing billions, they might make trillions. That's the sort of return on investment that these guys are looking at. Now, do they go and approach it in a normal business way with open, transparent plans that they tell to their shareholders and to the public? No. Why not? Well, that's obvious. If we explain that, we're on the wrong channel. So what do? Systems like you say, deception. So we have NGOs in Syria caught red-handed, faking events and giving material for publication to Western media outlets so that the Western media can use that faked material. This is on record. There's no questioning about it. So yeah, they want to justify the war using fake material. And who funds? Follow the money. Simple rule of thumb. Holding up my thumb now. Follow the money. Simple rule of thumb. white helmets is started by a British mercenary soldier. Okay, so there's one indicator. Like, oh, how did that happen? Good question. And who funds it? The UK government and
American government.
And American government, and reportedly George Soros. He's apparently denied that, but he's been caught funding everything else. He might as well fund this one as well. So what am I saying is that you're absolutely right. I'm trying to go back and make this very simple for people, because you and I have looked at this for a long time. In some ways, when you look at something long enough, it becomes harder to come back and explain it to someone that didn't look at it for as long as you. War is fought primarily in our minds first, because when we accept it, it becomes the norm and it's done. Notice, just as an example, for people watching, I'm taking up too much time, Bas. This should be about you. But
No.
Notice the question, like people used to ask, how long is the war going to last? When are we going to get out? Why are we there? They don't ask that anymore. It's become normalized. You mentioned in your video that you just made a couple of days ago that Afghanistan is the longest war that the U.S. has been in.
Foreign war, yes.
Foreign war, yes. American Indians are probably longer.
Yeah, if I can jump in. Perhaps you probably know, like me, that there's this a real profit motive, but even beyond that or beneath that, there's a bigger agenda of global control. I guess I don't know if your listeners are aware of that. If they want to have a brief, very readable overview of that, I highly recommend a very little book you can find for free online by Joe Plummer called Tragedy and Hope 101, and the title refers to a work by a very dense work by an American professor called Carol Quigley, who had an insider look into the dealings of what you could call the deep states of the end of the 19th century, and what culminated into the Anglo-American establishment. And he describes how this cliquish group of what turned into the Council on Foreign Relations and its offsprings in the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, all these sort of organs, how they sought, and this is an exact quote, to I'll paraphrase it because I'm not remembering quite correctly, but we want to take over all the inhabitable places of the world. And this was the beginning of the 20th century. By the First World War, they had taken control over the American governments through Woodrow Wilson and having installed the Federal Reserve and all of that, and they increased their control of the British government. But it later turned out, from, you can also all read this in this very short book, that what they said, how we gonna achieve this, like this global control. They asked themselves this, and their answer was we learned from another whistleblower, but I think his name is Norman Duff, and he's from an investigative committee who looked into the minutes of one of these tax-exempt foundations. I don't know.
Foundation, I think.
The Ford Foundation, indeed. And he came to the conclusion, he read in his first minutes of the Ford Foundation, which is heavily tied into this Anglo-American establishment, that the only way we can advance this interest, advance this agenda, is war. And this is why we have all seen all these wars from that point on. The First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War after that, and the War on Terror. They've all, to a certain extent, have been engineered. They have tried to set blocks of nations against each other. War results for that, and you have problem, reaction, solution, and gradually we advance more and more to quote unquote new world order. And that's why it's very interesting to like look at the research, for example, of Anthony Sutton, which is an American professor who has very greatly, very detailed, in a very detailed fashion, investigated how the heart of Wall Street, Rockefeller interests, Morgan interests, how they funded, how they were crucial in the funding and coming into existence of the Nazis, which led to World War II, of the Bolshevik Revolution, which created opposite blocks, which eventually culminated to the Cold War, and very interestingly as well, in corporate socialism in America with the New Deal and FDR, and so on, so on and so forth. And that's, I think, what we're seeing right now as well with the rise of China. Perhaps it would be ridiculous to say that that the rise of China since the 1970s, that is just something that the powers that be just didn't saw coming. No, it's the exact opposite. It was Henry Kissinger, a protege of the Rockefellers, who in his position in government convinced Nixon to open up to China and make China and other later other Southeast Asian nations into the manufacturing place of the world, where effectively slave labor, unfortunately, is used to make our goods, and that led to its rise. And now we're seeing this on a two-sided level. We see like China and US bashing against each other, but at the same time, we see, if we look into the policy papers of China, what they're proposing is they want globalism as much, but in another fashion, and that's perhaps this will end in a certain type of conflict, war or not. But we have to be very cautious that it's not going to be action reaction, problem reaction solution again. So we need to find a way to take the power back into our hands. That's my opinion.
Well, you're part of the solution, Bas, because you're out there presenting your views and you're researching, and you're a regular guy with very good skills and faults, just like the rest of us. And we're part of the wake up. Our numbers are growing. The understanding of people is growing. It has to continue for us to be successful, because the way these wars are run, it's basically allowed by popular opinion. Well, we can unallow it by popular opinion just as easily.
We have to.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's right. It's your show, Bas. So let's get into, we've got this problem of money. We've also got this problem of global control. We see in Syria as an example, and there's a great number of wars that we can break out just like Syria. Syria is just the latest, most visible example. Iran, if we're not careful, will be next. They're not done with Ukraine yet. They're definitely targeting Russia. Are they targeting China or not? Or will it be one of those cooperative efforts? I don't know. But it's been going on too long, and every empire seems to be doing the same thing. Let's talk about this rare awakening, because it's global. For the first time, Brzezinski said that this global awakening is the first time in human history that people are aware politically and globally at the same time, on the level that we are. That's an opportunity.
Indeed. I think with the rise of the internet, we have seen something unseen before in history. In history, people, the elitists just could like take control of the resources, and they had the capital to manufacture consent for what they wanted to do. But now we see with the rise of the internet, just the fact that you and I can just converse on this level and we just put it onto YouTube and people can watch it, we're just breaking the nexus of the corporate controlled media that has that serves as a manufacturing consent device that legitimized the rule of all this of the Anglo-American established of the New World Order. And we just seeing this sprouting up of alternative media in all kinds of in all fashions and kinds, and I think gradually we're sweeping away the control grip from underneath this the mainstream media, because you see in poll after poll, you see that people are not buying anymore into what the mainstream media is saying, and they're gradually but surely moving more and more towards alternative media personalities like you, like me. So that's a very good thing. At the same time, of course, we're more and more moving into these control grids in which technology, the same technology, is used to enslave us even further. And we have to be very cautious of that at the same time. So it's not the technology that is a problem, it's the way we use this technology. We have to use it for the better, not for the worse. That's why we have to use it to create alternative media, to go to perhaps use cryptocurrency or to all kinds of decentralized organization to connect with people all around the world and form communities, form solutions to all these problems, not to give all our data to the central organs, which are then sold to the CIA or through companies who use all this data to further create propaganda. And that's what we really have to be cautious about at the same time.
There seems to be a big divide between the mainstream media and the alternative media that should be visible by most people. On my YouTube list, I have thousands of people there, as you do and most of our friends do, and they get it. For some reason, the community that has assembled around me in Facebook gets it. They understand it. Not the general community, but that community. The LinkedIn community doesn't get it. That's a business community. And what's interesting is it is changing. I think what people need to see is just the difference. Here we have it. Okay, it's simple. Mainstream media, it's corporate funded, big money. They read from a teleprompter. They're paid actors. They're not specializing. They don't have a passion for their topic. They're paid to sit behind the desk and report. And if they don't do their job, they're fired. That's it. So that's one thing. The other thing is alternative media. Here we have it. Bas is out there. He's doing his own thing. He's passionate about it. He's learning. He's trying to communicate and learn at the same time. He's specializing. You know, you're already better than every mainstream media anchor, because when it comes to the topic of Syria, they're simply reading. They might look better, you know, as for in the eyes of some people, as maybe they look like an actor, or maybe they look very legitimate. I don't know, like presidential. I don't know. They might talk with smarter words because that might be why they were hired, but they're not telling the truth. They're paid to lie, and they're paid to lie and look like they're telling the truth. So people need to pick that up. For some reason, some communities grab it easier than others. I find smaller countries get it faster than bigger countries. Victim countries get it faster. So Syria is one of the most awake countries in the world right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you hit the nail on the head right there. While we see a lot of people around us, which can be people that are close to us or people that are like on the other side of the globe. For example, we right now waking up to this, and this is such a beautiful phenomenon where people all across the world are waking up to the lies that have been told to us at least 400 years, probably even further than that. but we don't have to fall into the illusion that everybody's waking up at this moment. And it's once you fell into this is what this social media does. Once you get into it, you see only alt media popping up on your recommendations, all of that. But it's very, very, very difficult for people who are just not woken up to bump into one of these videos and to start reading and to start researching on their own and coming to their conclusion and fall down a rabbit hole. So, and that's what I've not been long around enough and woke enough long enough. Perhaps you can resonate with it, but I heard people talking about Google Video, like that's maybe 10 years ago, where you had around 9/11 universities, you had like Google Truth videos just on top of the list of like most watched during this day and stuff like that. And at that time, when there was like real free internet, or like more free internet, this alt media community was growing so fast and so fast. But then they gradually starting to change the algorithm, and they start to bring in, they use false flag terrorism also for these means to curb the internet and to install regulation and more algorithms which make sure that yes, if you have fallen down a rabbit hole, you will see all of this. But when you don't, when you haven't yet, you're not gonna see all of these videos. And that's why we really need to talk. We really need to find ways to connect with these people. That's why I've been thinking about. I'm probably gonna travel for a year next year. And I've really been thinking about just going on the street, handing out flyers like watch this video of mine, or watch this, because we need to find other ways to connect with people as well. We cannot limit that to the internet, I think. And it's a very difficult talk, but it's a difficult way, but it's an important one. And that's why I, for example, did the lecture, which I mentioned in last talk. I think I'll just recapitulate. I did a lecture, a presentation about my travels to Syria and my my experiences in general. And it's way more difficult because when you're sitting behind your computer and you're talking or you're writing articles, you're not confronted by people who don't agree with you, or not yet, or not to a certain extent. But when you go on the street, when you give such a presentation, you get confronted by people that might think different from you, and you have to find common ground with them. We have to start to talk to people that are outside our communities, and we have to start reaching out to them as well. And it's a difficult task, and it's really hard for your well-being and your health, I think, because you also get a lot of
negative energy.
What
negative energy?
Yeah, negative energy as well. But you have to find a way to turn it into positive energy. To for example, during the lecture, there were like people upset, but it's very important to not be upset against them back, but just to reason with them and like give them a stage, let them finish their arguments, and just reply to that in a very easy fashion for them to understand, and just so you start making cracks into what they believe, just planting seeds. And we need to start, and not just on the topic of Syria, but just on everything. We need to talk to people just in our direct environments, and it doesn't have to be like, there is this new world order who is like enslaving us all in the first time. But just maybe start from for example, Syria right now, when people are talking about this alleged chemical weapons attack, you can point to these Western reporters who have been there and who have concluded from their testimony accounts that there wasn't a chemical weapon attack; it was purely a hoax. Say something like that, and they will be offended or shocked, but you will plant the seed, and that's what we have to do in the internet, but also outside of it.
Good point. Very good points. What's next for you? So I see a map behind you. Is that showing where you've been or showing where you're going to go, or both?
It's where I've been. So if I'll hold it a bit closer. If you see,
Syria's there in the middle.
Roughly, it's Europe in the middle. So it's essentially Europe and a bit of the Middle East. So I have a lot of things to do still. And that's indeed, while we're on the subject, I plan to finish my studies next year. The second semester, I'll be in Cairo for a couple of months for my studies in Egypt. And after that, I plan to travel around a bit, because there's just still so much to see, I think.
What's your best experience in Syria, aside from the war thing? Did you have anything that was quite unique about that experience, aside from the pain and the bad stories?
The positive energy, because we briefly talked about this before, how when you interact with people here, there's a lot of negative energy often. You hardly see any of that in Syria, in my experience. It's just undescribable how much love I got from people, and how nice people were, and like everywhere you go, people were just so friendly and so understandable, and they were so interested, even though they know I'm coming from Belgium, which is associated with NATO, and thus is responsible for the war on their country. But people are just, they emphasize over and over again two things. One, that it's not the people's fault in the West, but their governments. And two, it's also a very important point, how they, above anything else, want to uphold Syria's secular society. How Syria is just a very it's just a unique place where people of different religions and ethnicities, Kurdish, Arab, Assyrian, Syrians, Christians, Muslim, Shia, Sunni, Ismailiyat, Druze, almost all of them just come along just fine, and they emphasize that, and you see that confirmed in real life. People are Christians and Muslims are talking together on the street, are friends with each other, work together in companies, and are just friends with each other. And I think I told this story last time, but I think it's good to rehearse it. I was talking to a Christian who makes traditional Arab oud instruments. It's like this kind of traditional guitars in a tiny shop in one of the countless souks of the city of Damascus, and was such a friendly guy. And he told me a story. He told me, among other things, how a lot of Syrians are standing behind their government, which is certainly true, and that's really my experience. And to illustrate that, how important secularism is to the Syrian people, he told a story about a group of French journalists who visited his souk once upon a time, and it was some sort of holiday. So Christian and Muslim shopkeepers were gathering on the streets, and they had breakfast together, and they shared their foods, and they were just talking because it was some sort of holiday. I don't remember what kind. And the French journalists accepted their kind offer to join them. But astonishingly, one of them had like a very strange look on his face, and the Christian shop owner I talked to said like I was a little bit bothered by that. So I asked him like, what's up? What's on your mind? And this French journalist from this secular place called with a liberal democracy called France said like, wow, something like this just dates would never happen in our country, especially between people of different faith. There's like so much tension between people, and we see this as well here in Brussels, for example, where there's just so much tension between Wallonish people, Flemish people, immigrants, people who have lived here for generations, and so on and so forth. But that's almost non-existing in Syria. Since the events of civilization, religions, ethnicities have sprung up in this area, and people have, for the most part, have lived together throughout history in peace with each other. And Syria is just an example to the world in that case. And our Western governments, the people in control, are trying to destroy that right now, and that's just criminal, because
I think you're right.
Something we can really learn from. Really, I don't say this lightly. The Syrian people are just so friendly, and so they're an example to the world. That's the only thing I can say.
Very well put. Example to the world.
Yeah, and it's really, I really mean it. It's they know how to connect with people, how to behave towards each other. It's really astonishing to see, and perhaps they're unfortunate because they have had a pretty authoritarian government, which is true. But the only reason that has come into existence, and I've talked about that in my Anarchist Traveler's perspective on Syria, is because of decades of Western centuries of Western colonialism and imperialism and neo-colonialism. After that, attempts to overthrow the Syrian government, which culminates into the Ba'ath coup in the the coup of Hafez al-Assad in the 1970s, and a lot of plots, a lot of conspiracies have attempted to overthrow the Syrian government from that point on, and that made the government vigilant and repressive. If these threats were not coming from outside, this would never have happened. And if you look at the post-World War II history of Syria, it finally became independent from France in 1946, and they were actually democratically elected governments, just like in Iran with Mossadegh. And people, it was like really advancing towards a very modern society, and especially between people of other faith were connected as well. There's like a very famous prime minister, which is almost the highest elected position. I forgot his name, but he was a Christian, you see, and just a far cry from Saudi Arabia or a lot of Gulf states or Turkey, and the West has tried to destroy that for decades, and you can still see that in the people and who these people are, that is still present. So once we withdraw from the conflict, which is an artificial conflict, it's not a civil war. It would never have happened without the help coming from outside to these terrorists. So if we leave Syrian people alone, maybe there will be some kind of gradual revolution or reformance, where there will be better governments. I'm sure of that, but we have to leave them alone and to let them on their own come to form the society they want. That's what we have to do across the board. Non-interventionism. People here in the West have to rid themselves of the idea that they need to go overseas to save these or these people. It's never the case. It's never the case, because intervention, imperialism, always makes the problems in other countries worse, not better.
Very well
That's
said.
just
You know, this is actually quite simple. If we're in the West and if our government says that this country on the other side of the world is behaving very badly, and we have to go there in order to help the poor people of that country defend themselves against the brutal dictator, very simple question needs to be asked. Okay, if the intention is to do that right thing, what sort of money involvement will turn that good intention into the wrong thing? Well, first thing is military-industrial complex. Actually, the first thing is the big energy companies. And actually, the first thing are the big banks, because they own everything. Energy runs everything, and then the military gets it all done. And the politicians just feed off that money train that's financing what needs to be said in order to prosecute that war. And it's all based on this fake humanitarianism. People aren't buying it anymore. Anyone who's actually paying attention doesn't buy it anymore. Unfortunately, too many people still do not pay attention and still buy that. But it's really good to hear your insights. You're the one who's actually been there. You've got a big map up there. Do you have a lot of places you want to see?
Yeah.
Where have you been so far? All through Europe? You went also down that bottom. Oh, you've been, where is that?
That's Hong Kong.
Hong Kong. Okay.
Hong Kong. My stepmom is Belgian, but she lived in Hong Kong for 13 years, a long time ago, and we went there in 2011. It was the first time she went back there. It was a cool experience, but I was still a bit young and not so grown up, so I don't really remember. But the intention definitely is to on these travels, which I plan to embark upon, is to just see a part of Eurasia, if you want it. I want to go down Eastern Europe, Turkey, Iran, definitely. Arab world I go to regularly, so that's fine by now. Iran, and then to the extent possible, Central Asia it's a really important geostrategical area as well. You mentioned Zbigniew Brzezinski; he knows all about that, and then a bit of India, China, and then I see a flag there. Russia, of course, I want to take the Trans-Siberian train back to Europe, and if possible, I want to visit North Korea as well, because that's something else. That's something that's really interesting as well to visit, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I wish you luck on your journey, Bas. It's really great to talk to, fresh young guys coming up into the movement, fresh people, new eyes, new minds, new ways of looking at things. I respect your passion. I'm sure other people resonate with it as well. You got a lot of great concepts that you're bringing into the board. And some of this stuff might have been said before, but that doesn't matter. It's being said now in a different way by the next generation with new eyes on current issues. And that's what it's all about. It's really, really great to connect with you. So what do you have? I mean, is that's your next goal, is to travel? And imagine that position you're going to have as a journalist when you get finished with those travels. I mean, what do you want to do with your career? Have you thought about that at all?
That's a good question. And that's something I'm struggling with very much right now. So I'm learning Arabic, although I really like to learn the language, and I really have to learn a lot more because it's not so advanced at the moment. I don't like university. I'll just put it as simple as that, because just everything that goes along with it. We also have like political subjects, and I don't have to. You can imagine that most of my thoughts don't resonate with the professor's thoughts, and I'm sick and tired of it, actually. So I'm actually gonna finish after two bachelor. I have a bachelor's degree in history and then a bachelor's degree in Arabic studies. But I'm not gonna do a master, I think, because for one thing, I've learned while being in Lebanon. I met a guy who was for 7 months in Jordan, and his Arabic was so good. So for one thing, if I want to study Arabic further, it has to be in the Arab world. And secondly, yeah, I want to explore the world, and after that, go into journalism to the extent possible, and I'll have to do probably another job beside that. But if it's in a cafe or at something with Arabic, I actually don't mind. I want. That's where I've come to the realization of, like, I used to think like, I have to get all these degrees to fit into society, but I'm actually sick of that. I'm just gonna get this last degree and then focus on the important stuff, the journalism and all of that. And although it's probably true that I cannot live off that, certainly not in the first years, it can bring in a little money, and for the rest I'll work. I don't care as what, whatever brings in those extra money. So the plans for the future as well, besides for the traveling, is that in the summer I'm gonna relaunch the site, Scrutinized Minds, and I'm gonna go more and more into podcasts, so video presentations, just because on average people just tend to rather watch than to read. So I'm gonna go into that and reorganize everything, and we'll see where it goes from there. Yeah.
That's a great idea, Bas. You're living life to the fullest. You're getting real experiences, and that's what you only have a limited time on Earth, don't we? So we have to pick and choose. University experience wasn't fun for me, and I certainly, as an economics major, I had to unlearn what they taught me in order to have an understanding of how economics really works.
Wow, economy, I can imagine. Yes,
it's backwards.
You probably never learned. I'll ask you a question. Like, did they ever ask you, like, think about it? How is money created?
No.
What is money? No.
That's the last thing they would ask.
Yeah, it's the most important thing. How is money created? What is money? And if you start to understand that, you get into what the Federal Reserve is and national banking and all of that, how people create money out of thin air, and how that really didn't used to be the case previously. I don't understand all of it as well, but if you start to understand that, your whole understanding of economy, however long you have studied, just collapses all of the once, I think.
Absolutely right. And it's even worse than that, Bas. Not only they didn't ask those questions, they didn't even touch the topic of the history of money. So every other study, medicine, I don't know, engineering, whatever it is, they're going to get into history about how we got here.
Yes.
It doesn't happen in economics, not with money. They don't talk about it, because once you go back and you say, well, wait a minute, how did it change from here to there? Okay, we had barter, and then gold. Okay, gold was medium of exchange. Then how did it become paper? And who owns this paper? Who's controlling it?
And who owns this? Who owns the right to print this paper out of thin air? It sounds insane, but it's true. I think not all government issued money around the world, but most of it, of a lot of it, is printed by cartels of private banks who have gotten the sole rights to print money out of thin air. How much more power can you have?
You can't have more
power. If this power if this money is worth anything. Because if people start to disinvest from it, this control grid falls away. That's certainly true, but it's insane if you think about it. The Federal Reserve is a private cartel of bankers who own the rights, not the US government, who got the sole rights to print money out of thin air.
That's Bas Spliet. He's the journalist from Belgium. He's going to be coming at us with podcasts, and I will gladly be a member. I'll be a paying member of such a podcast. Just put a decent value out there, and I'm sure you will. With your travels, a lot of people are going to travel with you. With your research, a lot of people are going to understand these things in phases with you. So that could be something that people, jump onto and then, fall away and come back. And it could be a new way of making books. Rather than books, you've got this living podcast, research, experiential journal. I mean, who knows?
Yeah,
And part of it could be your work at the Arabic cafes as well. You just do your Sunday morning coffee with the podcast. Who knows?
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, best wishes to you, Bas. Let's do this again. You're always welcome here.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, and I'll be following you. Anything else? What else can we bring up? Something that I forgot or that you forgot?
At the moment, I think not. Maybe just if people are interested, they can go to www.scrutinizedminds with an S, scrutinizedminds.com. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure talking to you, Tate. And I love this conversation. It's really, really, really fun to do. And my heart goes out to you and for searching the truth. Your Truthseeker spots. It's a very cool idea. I like it very much. And remember also to the people watching this, you are powerful. We will break the chains of enslavement. We will get there. Hold on, plant those seeds.
Last word. That's you. That's us. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Well, thanks a lot, Bas.